A pleasant afternoon to everyone who is joining us here in the Philippines, especially those in the beautiful heritage city and province of Iloilo. A very early morning to our distinguished author who is in Europe. Welcome to the online book launch of this very important book by Judge Raul Pangalangan, Professor of Law and former Law Dean of the University of the Philippines, and former Judge and President of the Trial Chamber of the International Criminal Court at The Hague in the Netherlands. This event is organized by the University of the Philippines, Visayas, which is celebrating the 75th year of UP's presence in Iloilo. This event is also organized by my home college, the University of the Philippines College of Law in Diliman. I now invite the Chancellor of the University of the Philippines, Visayas, for his opening remarks.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Palacios. A pleasant afternoon to attendees from the Philippines, and of course, a good morning to Judge and Professor of Law, Raul Pangalangan. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Pangalangan, for allowing us to launch your book here at UP Visayas. You know, I kind of think of a more fitting way to celebrate, commemorate the 75th year anniversary of UP's presence in Iloilo than to hold events like this. You know, the launching of this piece of legal scholarship is significant for two reasons. One, it marks the advent of the UP College of Law's extension program here in UP Visayas, which is of course an initiative of the current president of the UP system, President Danilo Concepcion. Also, you know, this particular piece of scholarship puts the spotlight on a very important phase of Iloilo's development as a major trading port and commercial center. And later on, we will have a local historian provide us the context for this particular materials that are being featured in the book of Judge Pangalangan. You know, UP is really an integral part of Iloilo's history, and we certainly want to be part of its continuing growth story. And you know, it gives me pride and honor to be able to host events like this, because it shows that you know, the readiness, the willingness, and the enthusiasm of the university to not only, of course, to be part of this larger celebration, but also that you know, it affirms our commitment to be part of Iloilo as a growing community. So with that, thank you for your attendance. Thank you for judging this, for being with us this afternoon, Professor Pangalangan. Thank you to Professor Palacios for coordinating this, and of course to the leadership of the College of Law under Dean Vistan. So thank you everyone, and have a pleasant afternoon.
Thank you very much, Chancellor Clem. That's how everyone fondly calls Chancellor Camposano. He is the Chancellor of UP Visayas. At the same time, he's also OIC of UP Cebu. So he's actually heading both universities. Next, we will have a message from Senator Juan Edgardo Sani Angara, himself a graduate of the UP College of Law and a former member of the UP Board of Regents.
Hello, I'd like to greet the author, Judge Raul Pangalangan, Governor Defensor, Dean Carlo Vistan, Chancellor Camposano, Director Casis, Professor Palacios, Mr. Lujan, and the members of the UP Visayas and UP College of Law community. First of all, of course, congratulations to a very distinguished member of the UP community, the former College of Law Dean, our professor in Constitutional Law, Dean and Judge Raul Pangalangan, for another feather in an already crowded cap of his, full of achievements and proverbial feathers of success. I remember when I was fortunate to study at the Harvard Law School. Professor Pangalangan was teaching a course in Southeast Asian law. I think, if I'm not mistaken, the first Filipino to teach a course at the Harvard Law School. And of course, Dean Pangalangan, as the Dean of the College of Law in 2 decades ago, Dean Raul was highly respected and went on to mentor many, not only in my generation but in succeeding generations and batches of UP College of Law students. So we thank him for that, and we're amazed at how he found the time to continually pursue his legal research. Definitely this volume will be welcome in an evolving field like international law, where the sources are so varied, and there's a need to really collate the materials to educate future generations, as it's not quite as simple as domestic law, where one consults the black letter law. So we thank Dean Pangalangan, and we salute him for another success. Mabuhay!
A very nice personal message from Senator Sani, who turns out was a student of author Judge Pangalangan in constitutional law, and also followed in the footsteps of Judge Pangalangan in pursuing graduate studies at Harvard Law School. Next, we will have a message from Governor Arthur Toto Defensor Jr. of the province of Iloilo, himself a graduate of UP Visayas and also of UP Diliman.
Pleasant afternoon to everyone here in this online book launch, especially to Judge Raul Pangalangan, the book author, Senator Sani Angara, who I understand will join UP Visayas Chancellor Clement Camposano, UP Law Dean Carlo Vistan, and the faculty, students, alumni, and staff of UP Law and my alma mater, UP Visayas. Monday last week, Chancellor Camposano and UP Law Professor Raj Palacios met with me about the launch of this new book on international law by Judge Raul Pangalangan. I understand that the book, Philippine Materials in International Law, is an important collection of Philippine, foreign, international court decisions, laws, and other legal documents relating to international law in the Philippines. I congratulate and thank Judge Pangalangan for his valuable contribution to legal scholarship. I was very interested to learn from Raj, my contemporary in UP High School and in UP Diliman College, that one of the arbitral cases in Judge Pangalangan's book involves events that happened in Iloilo from December 1898 during the climax of the successful Philippine Revolution until February 1899, the start of the Philippine-American War. I was more interested to discover when I did my quick legal research that the arbitral case by Great Britain against the U.S., called the Iloilo Claims case, created an important precedent under international law regarding the duty of an occupied military force to respond to requests for protection. The arbitral decision focused on the acts of the U.S. military forces that occupied Iloilo and the requests for protection by the British merchants in Iloilo. At the background of the story are the so-called Filipino insurgents, the brave and patriotic Filipino revolutionaries who fought against the Spanish colonizers and the American occupation forces. This arbitral decision in Judge Pangalangan's book touches upon three things that Ilonggos are proud of: our rich heritage, our belief in the rule of law, and our readiness to defend our country. Mr. Nelio Lujan, our resident historian here in the province of Philippine, has prepared a very interesting presentation on the historical context of the important arbitral decision. I look forward to viewing this presentation. Again, congratulations to Judge Raul Pangalangan for his very important book on international law and the Philippines. And many thanks to UP Visayas and the UP College of Law for organizing this book launch. Madamong salamat at maayong hapon sa inyo.
Thank you very much, Governor Toto Defensor of the province of Iloilo. Next, I invite Professor Romel Casis, the director of the UP Institute of International Legal Studies, to introduce our distinguished author and his very important book.
Judge Raul Pangalangan, Chancellor Campusano, Dean Carlo Vistan, and to all the participants in this book launching, a good afternoon, a good morning, a good evening, wherever you may be during this time. It is my distinct honor to introduce my former professor and College of Law Dean who invited me to teach in the College of Law many years ago to talk, also to introduce him and to talk a little bit about his book. Professor Raul Pangalangan, as he was known to us then, is a former judge at the International Criminal Court at The Hague. He was presiding judge in the landmark case on attacks on cultural and religious heritage and sat in the case involving child soldiers and forced marriages by members of a rebel group. He also sat ad hoc in appeals chambers on murder, rape, and sexual slavery as war crimes or as crimes against humanity. He has now resumed his post as professor of law at the University of the Philippines, where he also served as law dean in 1999 to 2005. He has taught international law at the Harvard Law School as visiting professor and has served as director of studies and later as lecturer at the Hague Academy of International Law. He has also held visiting appointments at the Hong Kong and Melbourne universities and has lectured at the Salzburg Seminar on the International Criminal Law, Humanitarian Law, and Human Rights as keynote. The Irish Center for Human Rights, the Thessaloniki Institute of International Public Law, and Waseda University in Japan. He is currently a member of the Permanent Court of Arbitration at The Hague and a judge of the Asian Development Bank Administrative Tribunal in Manila. In 2021, he was elected to the Institut de Droit International. He sits in the Governing Council of the Asian Society of International Law. He received his AB cum laude and LLB from the University of the Philippines and his LLM and SJD from Harvard Law School, where he was awarded the Leyland Prize in International Law for his LLM thesis and the Sumner Prize on International Peace for his SJD dissertation. He holds a diploma of the Hague Academy of International Law. Judge Pangalangan has many more accomplishments, but he asked to keep his introductions short so I can spend more time introducing his book. But before I introduce the book, let me share with you a brief anecdote to help you understand my feelings at the moment. In our first year in law school, I distinctly remember this conversation I had among my classmates about our professors. And when we got to talk about Judge Raul, there was a consensus that we all felt compelled to study for his class, not because of fear, but because he was always well prepared for class. In the vernacular, we said, nakakahiya naman sa kanya pag di tayo nag-aral. So we were motivated to study out of a sense of honor. And I carry that same conviction with me today as I attempt to introduce his book. The title of the book is simply Philippine Materials in International Law. But the simplicity of the title should not lead us to assume that this book is merely a compilation. It is much more than that. True, the volume does contain key documents pertaining to the Philippines and international law, but each document is carefully curated to tell the story of Philippine engagement with international law. Not only that, each chapter begins with an overview that sets the context for each chapter. I would say that each overview constitutes a paper in itself, a seamless weaving of history and law. Philip Alston, in his foreword, would say that the book's contribution is not only to Philippine history, but to the history of international law in general. In merely 482 pages, this volume tells the story from the beginning of the Philippine state in its revolution against Spain until international law's most recent development, international criminal law. I know many in our audience today are not fortunate enough to have a copy of the book in their hands right now. So thus allow me to discuss its contents to satisfy your curiosity and to whet your appetite to read the contents for yourself. The book is composed of 10 chapters. Chapter 1 is titled Constituting the Philippine State and International Law. This chapter contains the main legal instruments that documented the struggles against Spanish and American colonialism at the level of statesmen and revolutionary heroes. Beginning from the declaration of war by Governor General Ramon Blanco in 1896 until the proclamation of independence in 1946. Chapter 2 is titled The Armed Conflict with the United States Before the Courts and Courts Martial. This chapter covers the same period covered by Chapter 1, but contains judicial decisions that look at war from below. The cases involve court-martial cases, international arbitration cases, and cases decided by Philippine courts. Chapter 3 is titled National Territory, and it includes discussions on terrestrial claims and maritime territory. Chapter 4 is titled The Philippines and the International Court of Justice. This chapter discusses the Philippines' consent to the court's compulsory jurisdiction and the Manila Declaration of Pacific Settlement of Disputes, among others. Chapter 5, and my favorite chapter, I guess, is on sources of international law, my favorite topic in international law. This chapter shows how different sources of law under the ICJ statute applies in the Philippines. Chapter 6 is titled U.S. Military Bases. This chapter traces the legal history of military bases in the Philippines through legal instruments and cases. Chapter 7 is on human rights. It's titled Human Rights Cases from the Marcos Dictatorship. And it documents in judicial decisions victims' claims for reparations and is an effective weapon against historical revisionism. Chapter 8 is on immunities. And this chapter deals with the immunity of states and international organizations. Chapter 9 is on extradition. This chapter deals with statutory framework for extradition and how it is interpreted and applied despite the numerous flip-flopping of cases throughout the years. And finally, Chapter 10, International Criminal Law. This chapter traces the early beginnings of ICL in the Philippines in 1922, the tragic fate of comfort women, the principle of command responsibility, and the International Criminal Court. Now, as Alston has pointed out in his foreword, the considerable virtue of this book is that it presents the actual primary materials that give the most authentic picture of this history, rather than obliging the reader to take the author's word as to the significance of different incidents, episodes, cases, and official statements. As a result, the reader can judge for herself the extent to which the principles of international law can be said to have penetrated Philippine legal discourse and, conversely, the ways in which Philippine practice has contributed to shaping international law doctrine. The book gives us information we need, but leaves us to draw our own conclusions. Rather than impose on us the ideas of the author, the book is designed to allow the reader to develop his own ideas. In this sense, the book transforms its readers into academics. As a professor of international law, this book is a treasured resource because it allows us to no longer be fully reliant on Western sources. Particularly, the history of international law is almost exclusively taught using the European or Western experience. This book allows us to view international law from the lens of Philippine history, making the story more complete and relevant to our people. In the words of Judge Pangalangan, these materials embody the full range of homegrown interpretations of international law. In closing, I find Judge Pangalangan's description of the book most accurate. The book is a retelling of Philippine history using international law and a revisiting of international law doctrine through the eyes of Philippine lawyers and judges. Congratulations and many thanks to the author, Judge Pangalangan, for creating this national treasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Rommel, for that wonderful introduction. I can't wait to get my hands on a copy of the book. I understand that the UP College of Law has ordered several copies. Next, I will invite the Dean of the University of the Philippines College of Law to give his comments on this very important book that we launched today. The Dean himself is a scholar of international law, doing his PhD in law. UP College of Law Dean Carlo Bistan II.
Thank you, Raj. First of all, let me, of course, thank Chancellor Clem Camposano for hosting, of course, our Iloilo extension classes in the Iloilo City campus of UP Visayas, and for co-hosting or co-organizing this event. To Senator Sani Angara, to Governor Arthur Defensor Jr., thank you for your messages. Professor Cassis, thank you for your introduction of the book and, of course, its distinguished author. To all our colleagues, especially in UP Visayas, as well as in Diliman, in the College of Law and the College of Law community, thank you all for attending. And finally, Judge Raul Pangalangan, my dean, and who I was pleasantly surprised asked that I give comments on the book. It's not often nowadays that I am dean, that I would speak in these events on a more, I would say, with a more substantial role, rather than just giving opening remarks. So, considering the honor and privilege of doing so, I accepted, and I thank Judge Raul, who also was my mentor as a moot court, Jessup competitor during my days in the law school. So let me begin, and I do hope I do justice to your work, Judge Raul. So my approach as a scholar, as well as in many other aspects of my pursuits in life, is that of a scientist. So I have a degree in molecular biology and biotechnology. I was trained as a scientist ever since my high school days. In the scientific method that is the bedrock of the discipline, the process of observation to gather data or facts and the proper recording of such observations are critical. The hypotheses and theories we come up with from the data we gather are only as good as what the data we observed and recorded will allow us. Stated differently, in the search for truths in the natural and social sciences, the facts or the evidence matters. This is the value of raw data or information in the scientific discipline. And I begin my commentary of Judge Raul Pangalangan's latest published work, Philippine Materials in International Law, by remarking that it is a scholar's, and dare I say, scientist's treasure trove. Most sensible legal writings are based on a set of core materials that are usually in the form of documents or recollection of experiences. More often than not, the processing of these materials through comparisons, analysis, and critique dominates typical writings in the law. Judge Pangalangan's book takes on a different approach as he places the spotlight on the material. The collection of materials that Judge Pangalangan presents in his book is clearly a product of long and studied curation. The commentary he offers as an introduction to each chapter of materials is insightful, at the same time that it invites further analysis and study on the part of the reader. Judge Pangalangan's guiding but open-ended contextualization of the materials makes the reader understand the rationale for the curated sets, but he allows the materials to dominate eventually so that they can tell their own story. Even in the study of the law, I have found that the scientific method is appropriate if not necessary. Whether in the historical analysis of legal institutions or in their creation and adjustment, an evidence-based approach is preferred, with most people professing this belief, even if actual adherence varies. We want our stories and lives to be based on truths, after all. Existing legal institutions and power arrangements could be viewed as ongoing experiments based on theories and hypotheses on what is good for society. And these experiments are bound to be evaluated sooner or later. In all these, again, the facts, the evidence matters. For the topics that Judge Pangalangan's book touches upon, the material he has carefully gathered and annotated are pieces of evidence awaiting further processing, an already satisfying selection that promises to offer more as they intrigue the imagination. The first two chapters of the book readily demonstrate how Judge Pangalangan's carefully selected materials invite further discourse. Entitled Constituting the Philippine State in International Law and the Armed Conflict with the United States before the Courts and Courts Martial, the materials gathered under these headings provide a fresh international law perspective on the Philippine Revolution against Spain, the ensuing resistance against the American forces after Spain's defeat, and the formal end of American colonization a few decades thereafter. While the prominent thread that Judge Pangalangan weaves across the materials under these chapters is one of state formation against a backdrop of a struggle for liberation or independence, a scholar of Philippines colonial history could easily use these materials to complete a picture of the Filipino project on what would eventually be called self-determination in international law. For this, however, one has to go beyond Judge Pangalangan's book and study the decades before the Philippine Revolution that would show efforts of the Philippine intellectual and political elites to convince Spain to assimilate the Philippines as one of its provinces. And also, one must evaluate this process of self-determination in relation to the Americanization of the Philippines as it was, quote, unquote, benevolently assimilated in the course of American colonial rule. As I said, Judge Pangalangan's book invites further discussion and rekindles long-standing debates, and he gives us the materials to invigorate these scholarly pursuits. The time allotted to me prevents me from commenting on the other chapters of Judge Pangalangan's book. So as I wind up this commentary, may I just share one critique? Or maybe it should be called an alternative perspective that relates to one of the stated premises or goals of this work. In his introduction, Judge Pangalangan says that he hopes to belie the persistent notion of an international law disconnected from and even hostile to the Philippines. While I would agree that some would hold or believe in this notion, I would beg to differ on its persistence, as I am of the view that the contrary notion or predisposition actually dominates our society, or at least our legal profession. In other words, I believe that we actually have a propensity to resort to international or foreign law and international or foreign institutions to a degree that makes me feel uneasy, if I may share a personal view. In one webinar last June on crimes against humanity and the International Criminal Court, I commented that we have become in recent years a nation that tends to run to international institutions for help, as typified by the West Philippine Sea dispute and the complaints filed before the International Criminal Court against the President. In the same paragraph of Judge Raul Pangalangan's introduction of his book, from where I got the excerpt I quoted earlier, Judge Raul actually gives further testimony on this propensity of Filipinos to resort to international law and institutions. In the end, I believe this is less of a critique and more of, as I said, an alternative view, shaped perhaps by different preferences based on the same set of facts or observations. As for my view on the matter, I believe I have come to terms with it through a historical justification that explains the observations I have made on our propensity to go international or foreign, quote unquote. The Philippines' archipelagic constitution, location, and history made it a crucible of foreign influences since time immemorial, as some would say. From the historical accounts of trade with various foreign civilizations to our land's colonization by foreign powers, and more recently to our passage of a law that allows elective dual citizenship or the possession of dual citizenship by choice, despite the Constitution's seeming distaste for dual allegiance. Our history of a hodgepodge of foreign influences could plausibly explain why many of our people have a cosmopolitan outlook and would tend to be more familiar with foreign cultures rather than be able to define what is truly Filipino. In fact, I am at the point of my reflections where I am leaning towards the idea that the process of arriving at the latter, the concept of what is truly Filipino, should involve reconciling ourselves with the foreign elements that influence our emergence in the international community, rather than disentangling these elements to find what is unique in us. I realize that after all, our history does not dictate our destiny, and what we are as a people then and now is not necessarily what our children and their generation will be. I am inspired to say this on this occasion because of the first two chapters of Judge Pangalangan's book on the formation of the Philippine state. Our journey to statehood and independence from colonial rule is already part of the history books, as they say. But our journey towards a national identity, I would submit, is still and perhaps will always be a work in progress. Materials like those in Judge Raul Pangalangan's book can help us navigate this next journey as they allow us to situate ourselves in the larger world stage and find our bearings as a people. For that, we thank and congratulate Judge Raul Pangalangan. To our audience, thank you very much for your attention and indulgence. I wish you all a pleasant day.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dean Carlo, for sharing your insights in helping situate the important book of Judge Raul Pangalangan in the centuries-old process of developing the Philippine state, the Philippine nation, and also explaining the tension between the Philippine community and international law. I now invite our distinguished author, Judge Raul Pangalangan, to give his response to the comments.
Thank you so much, Raj. Chancellor Clement Camposano, Dean Carlo Vistan, Professor Romel Casis, and of course the moving spirit of this entire event, Professor Raj Palacios, and our historian Nereyo Lujan. My response, quick response to both the governor and to the warm welcome of Chancellor Clement. I must say that when Professor Palacios first told me about this plan to hold a a book launch in Iloilo. I really welcomed it. First of all, for the reason that the Chancellor already mentioned about the Iloilo claims case and the links of Philippine history to your noble city. Also, on in terms of my own professional background, I actually visited Iloilo quite often during the early days when UP was setting up the Miagao campus, and aware of the dynamic between the Iloilo campus and the Miagao campus, and of course the community at Miagao. And of course, on a personal ground, my wife's family is from Iloilo, from Haro. And her lolo was the founding pastor of CPU. And it is therefore a combination of both historical, personal, and a very personal reason that I'm so glad that to be here at this event. It was wonderful to hear from Senator Angara. Always wonderful to see a former student go places and actually recall life as my student. Same thing with Professor Cassis. I'm glad Rommel had warm memories of life as my student, and I value Rommel's approach about the book as using international law through the lens of Philippine history. Indeed, Rommel, the approach that I chose for the book of using primary materials to address issues actually addresses a fundamental challenge to the discourse today, which is a tendency toward fake news and toward bypassing facts in the analysis of issues. To the Dean, I'm so glad that he validated my chosen approach. Actually, Dean, I had initial hesitations about using this approach, but I'm so glad that you validate and affirm it from both a scientific and historical standpoint, which also explains why in my acknowledgement in the book, the very first sentence was my thank you to UP for providing me this both support and an intellectual home. I acknowledge your alternative view, which is a very optimistic view of the role of international law. Indeed, there is that propensity to bypass the national toward the international in some aspects. I do not dispute that. But what I wanted to address was the shifting attitudes toward precisely the recourse to international and the prevailing definition of nationalism in Philippine discourse today. I thank the governor for joining us today online. When Raj told me the news that the governor was joining us, I told him I couldn't believe that it rose to that high level that the governor himself would be present. And I look forward to the presentation of our historian Nereo Lujan. Okay, on the book. You know, the whole book actually began with a conversation when the famous international lawyer, Professor Eli Lauterpacht of Cambridge University, visited Manila. I was his host. And one of the first questions he asked me was, what is the local discussion, the local attitude to the famous Iloilo claims case? And it was my first time to hear about it. In fact, for a while, I couldn't understand it because he pronounced Iloilo, well, I suppose in the British way, and it took me a while. And I'm so glad that that the governor has spared me from having to summarize the case. And he summarized it so well, almost like a law student reciting a case for the class. I won't repeat what the governor has said, and also the legal importance of the case, that it establishes the principle for that the U.S. was not responsible to save Iloilo from the insurgents at the height of the Philippine Revolution, because it was a time when the U.S. had not yet ratified the Treaty of Paris, and the transfer of sovereignty had not yet been completed. And the governor's legal analysis is, on spot on that issue. But the thing is, and that is why I wrote the book, how come it was known by a British professor in Cambridge, but it was not being discussed in the Philippines? And that is why I said I must have a book that brings all these cases to the forefront of Philippine consciousness. I will proceed to other cases, actually. Chancellor, there was the court-martial of Major Edward Glenn about the torture of the Presidente of the Pueblo of Igbaras, Tobeniano Ealdama, in the province of Iloilo. As I said to the Chancellor earlier, referred to as the second most important city in the Philippines at that time. And he was tortured because he refused to divulge where they can find General Delgado. That was the water cure was imposed on him just to ensure that they can find and trace General Delgado. There was also a separate US Senate investigation. So notice, this is what we hear today, the legislative inquiry by no less than the US Senate for the torture and eventually the death of a priest, the parish priest of Banate, Iloilo, Augustine de la Peña. And our historian might wish to correct the historical record. I imagine it was really Agustin, now not Augustine. But de la Peña was parish priest of Molo, acting bishop of Haro. He was again subjected to the water cure. Again, they were trying to trace Quintin Salas, his relative, and who was the head of the insurgent troops in eastern Panay. Actually, you might be interested in a side story. The witness against him was actually the parish priest from Haniuay, and who said that that Father de la Peña was actually a member of the insurgent troops, and that he was planning to attack the towns of Maasin and Leon. And he was arrested in Banate. And when he was arrested, he was actually wearing a military uniform. So I think it's the biggest giveaway. And he was accused of being actually the treasurer for the insurgent troops. The court-martial would not have been held had it not been for a scoop by the Washington Post, which reported the torture of Father de la Peña. There are many other cases relating in international law relating to Iloilo. The only Filipino judge in the Tokyo War Crimes Tribunal was Delfin Jaranilla, also from Iloilo. And still in the island of Panay, one of the biggest asylum cases was in the Pacificador case from I understand from Antique in northern Panay. So there are many other cases that I will not discuss. And just to close now in my last minute, when I was reading the torture of Father de la Peña and of the Presidente of his town, Ealdama, and the way they did not yield, they would not divulge any information about the rebels. I was so impressed by the kind of the patriotism of the people of Iloilo, that they will withstand torture in the case of Father de la Peña until he died for a cause larger than themselves. And I often, in the course of reading this, I asked myself, are we capable of that kind of self-sacrifice today? And is it something that happened only 100 years ago? And are we capable of replicating it in our time, facing the challenges that we face today? And for me, I would like to close on the frequent metaphor, the term, the courage of one's convictions. Just like Dean Vistan, I will be optimistic. I do think we are not lacking in that courage, but I think what we are in search of are those convictions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judge Raul. Your personal project is now a public treasure. As you said, your aim is to retell Philippine history using international law and to re-examine international law using the Philippine experience. So we're very grateful for this valuable contribution to legal scholarship. I wish to mention that a descendant of the Philippine Revolutionary General Martin Delgado is actually attending this event. He is Mr. Andy Moran, and I think he is in Iloilo at the moment, right? We're going to hear the historian's perspective of the events that provided the material for the cases that are in the book, the very important book of our distinguished author. He is the resident historian of the province of Iloilo, and I now invite Mr. Nereo Lujan to give his presentation.
Yes, good afternoon, Raj. Good afternoon, Sir Clement. Judge Pangalangan, it's an honor to meet you, sir. And to the organizers, thank you for inviting me. I was requested to share some background on what happened in Iloilo that led to the British claims. No? And I'd like to share. Mag-share ano lang ako. Can I request the host to allow me to share my screen? It says here, host disabled participant screen sharing. Sir, I'm trying to. Okay. Okay, so I'd like to share on the Iloilo claims, and there's a chapter in the history of Iloilo known as the Iloilo fiasco, which actually led to the claims. And but before that, I'd like to introduce you to my city. This is Iloilo in the 1930s, and you can see here on this side, this is the Iloilo Strait. And this is what we call as the Iloilo River, which is not actually a river, but it's an arm of the sea, and it goes up to this area here in Molo. And this strip here is what Iloilo City is now. This area is part of Arevalo already. And you can see the 1930s, it's already an urbanized area. In the same period, you can see here, this is Muelle Loni, no? Muelle Loni, that's the river wharf of Iloilo, and you can see here the customs house. And you can see buildings made of strong materials. No? Then I'll bring you back to the 1880s. No? These are photos of Iloilo from the 1880s. These are part of the book known as Recuerdos de Filipinas by Felix Laureano. It was published in 1895 in Spain. But these photos, I am confident to say that these photos were taken in the 1880s because Laureano left the Philippines in 1887 to participate in the Exposition General de las Islas Filipinas in Madrid during 1887. So he must have brought with him slides, no, or the films that he used in taking these photos. No? So this, you can see houses in Isnart, buildings of strong materials in Progreso. This is now Dilarama Street. Now you can see the buildings along the river wharf, and big nice houses. No, part of Iloilo history is that in 1890, the Iloilo City, or what is now Iloilo City proper, was declared as a zone of strong materials. No? Because earlier the Spanish government prohibited the use of kanya and nipa as building material in Iloilo. So you cannot build houses made of nipa and bamboo. You can only use wood or stone because because of the fire that brought a lot of devastations in the area. So there have been several decrees starting from 1852, 1865, 1869, 1874, and in 1888 it was already decreed that within the period of 1 year there will all houses made of light materials, all buildings made of light materials will disappear in Iloilo. So it was declared as a zone of strong materials. Now, the person responsible, of course, for they say that he was responsible for the growth of Iloilo was Nicolas Loni. You know? That's why the river wharf was named Muelle Loni, because it was named after this person, Nicolas Loni. He arrived in Iloilo in 1856. He became the British Vice Consul, and he saw that the land of Iloilo and Negros is very suitable to the planting of sugar. So he introduced the modernization of the sugar industry. And from there, the sugar mills mushroomed all over Western Visayas. And he opened world trade. Actually, the port of Iloilo was opened to world trade in the year before Loni came to the Philippines. But because of sugar, there was a ready product, no? And while Loni was credited for the growth of the sugar industry, he was also tagged as the killer of the textile industry, because once pag dinadala yung sugar abroad, ang return ship, Loni would bring a cheap Manchester textile. So namatay yung textile industry sa Panay, because yun nga, hindi siya makakumpit sa murang textile galing sa England. Loni was born in Plymouth, no, in England. So this is a map of Iloilo in 1893. You can see this portion here. This is Plaza Libertad, and ito yung area na to is mga buildings na yan, no? Mga buildings na yan, and ang portion ng map na ito yung index ng, makita mo pag may mga numbers ito, and they correspond to the owners of the properties, no, and the buildings, no. This is an enlargement of that, no, that area na kung saan makita mo yung Muelle Loni, no. Some of the names that are found in the list, no, you have here European traders na. You have Bangko Hong Kong, which is the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank, Bishop, Lev Hermanos, Open, George Saul, Andrew Hoskin, no, Kerr. Some of these are actually parties in the Iloilo claims, no. Some of the names you find here. This is the Club Ingles in 1894, and this shows that there's already a substantial British population in Iloilo during this period, no. There are also Scots, there are Germans, French, no. The Levi Hermanos is French, and the fact na yung maganda na yung kanilang headquarters, talagang nagpapatunay na may malaking British population na sa Iloilo nung kapanahon na yun. Now, until 1970s, may vice consulate sa Iloilo. You can see here the British consulate in 1911 in the Manila Times, and then there's a list of successors of Loni until 1975. No, I'm not sure if after that, because I got this from the 1975 souvenir program of the 120th anniversary of the Port of Iloilo. So let me guide you to go back to what happened before. Sorry. Wait. Okay. So nung sumiklab yung revolusyon sa Luzon, no? Ang Iloilo kasi the Ilonggos then were really very comfortable, no? Because of the sugar industry, no? And ayaw nila ng revolusyon. So the Ayuntamiento of Haro and the next day the Ayuntamiento of Iloilo condemned the uprising, no? And all other towns, no, in Panay condemned the uprising in Luzon, no? And that's why the Queen Regent then gave the title Amoy Noble to the Ciudad de Iloilo because of its loyalty to Mother Spain. No, they did not want the revolution; they condemned the revolution, and they did not just condemn the revolution. No, they organized the Ilonggo Volunteer Battalion to help fight the Katipuneros, no? So, which was inaugurated in 1896 November. They sent the voluntarios to Luzon to fight the Katipuneros. No? Among the voluntarios was Martin Delgado. No? And when the voluntarios returned, some of them, guys like Rocky Lopez, Pablo Araneta, and somebody's surname Yusay, I forgot the first name. They organized the Committee Conspirador, no, and they wanted to rise against Spain already, no? And so on May 1, of course, you know that the Spanish-American War already erupted, and when Spain surrendered Manila in August of 1880, they just surrendered actually Manila. No, they did not surrender the entire archipelago to the U.S. No, and Iloilo was made as the new capital of the Spanish regime. So Diego de los Rios became the last Spanish governor general of the Philippines. No, and during that time when de los Rios was already here in Iloilo, the revolution in Panay was already starting. No? With this, we have now celebrations like the Cry of Lingkod, the Cry of Hilicon, and the Cry of Santa Barbara. No? Which actually, these uprisings that took place in October led to the declaration of the revolutionary government of the Visayas in 17 November, which is a local holiday actually in Iloilo every November 17 because it marks what we call as the Cry of Santa Barbara. No, and because the traders in Manila have branch of offices here in Iloilo, they requested, no, bankers and merchants in Manila petition the U.S. to protect their business houses in Iloilo, and but on the 24th of December, no, because the revolutionaries were already attacking Spanish outposts. No, actually there were very few Spanish soldiers then, and General Diego de los Rios was forced to surrender to the army of Martin Delgado, and Martin Delgado was the head of the army, the head of the local committee was Roque Lopez. No? So Rios moved to Zamboanga to wait for instructions. And from that time, December 24, no, because on the 25th, there was a triumphal entry of the revolutionaries to Iloilo, and it marked the start of the revolutionary government of the Visayas, or later known as the federal government of the Visayas. Now, so on December 26, the expeditionary force under Marcos Miller was dispatched from Manila to Iloilo, and Miller was under instructions to avoid a clash with the Ilonggos, and so there were exchanges of letters, exchanges of meetings between the Americans and the local leaders, and the Ilonggo revolutionaries didn't want Miller to land. No? Miller had been asking them to allow him to land. So that's why Jonathan Bass, the correspondent of the Harper's Weekly, wrote an article. It's known as the Iloilo fiasco, because for 50 days, Miller could not land his forces in Iloilo. He was only on his boat, floating along the Iloilo Strait. No? So again, the British merchants petitioned Miller to take into consideration their large interest. No? They did not want Miller to attack, no? Because yun nga, maraming mga materials sila, mga stocks na kanilang mga paninda na nandito pa sa Iloilo. If you go to the documents of the Iloilo claims, you can actually, it will give us a picture of ano yung meron sa Iloilo during that time, no? Ano yung mga nag-circulate na product sa Iloilo. And of course, the Council of State of the Visayas also warned Miller na ayaw nilang may interference, no, sa pamamalakad ng mga Visayan. No? And one reason why Miller was not allowed or was cautioned to spark hostilities in Iloilo is that hindi pa na ratify yung Treaty of Paris, no, na yun nga hinihintay ng Amerika, no. So dito naman sa lupa, maraming kasi nanawagan nga si General Delgado na yung mga armies from the towns, they have to converge to defend Iloilo for a possible attack by the Americans. No? So the Ilonggos fortified harbors and yung Fort San Pedro na nasira noong 1945, and yun nga, they had to kerosene all the buildings. No? So I just can't imagine yung amount ng kerosene na nilagay nila, kasi yun nga, Iloilo is a zone of strong materials, no. So kung sinunog ng mga revolusyonaryo yung Iloilo, napakaraming kerosene yung nilagay nila siguro doon sa mga buildings na yon, no. So when fighting broke out in Manila between the Americans and the Filipino troops, Otis finally ordered Miller to occupy Iloilo. And his warning was that Iloilo will be attacked on the 12th of February, because that was the advice that he gave to the foreign consuls. No, we have German consulates here, may Japanese, may British, may American consulate, may French, etc. Because Iloilo is it's the Queen City of the South, the city second of Manila, second of importance to Manila, no? Kaya nga tinawag siyang Queen City of the South. However, on February 11, no, a day before the supposed attack, kasi yung schedule is February 12, yung Petrel, yung isang barkong Petrel, they spotted movements on the land, and they had to decide, no, na i-attack yung Iloilo kasi yung nga may nakikita silang movement na ng mga sundalo Pilipino sa coast ng syudad, no. So they attacked Iloilo, and the revolutionaries made through their warning na once mag-attack yung Amerikano, susunugin nila yung syudad ng Iloilo. So the taking of Iloilo actually attracted media attention in the US, no. Some of the articles that were published in American newspapers. So sinunog nila, they actually yung scorched earth policy tawag nila. So the last man to exit from Iloilo was actually Pablo Araneta, no, a general from Molo. So well, years later, yun nga, this brings us to the Arbitration Tribunal na, no, na because maraming nawala, no, sa paninda ng mga British merchants, no. If you could just like for example yung Hoskin, ano ba yung nawala sa kanya? Ayon dito sa document, you have $151 worth of vacuum oil. Ito yung mga list of claimants, no, 18 sila lahat. They have $1,652 worth of Pacific Oriental Trading, 50 barrels of oil, may earthenwares, wash basin, soup plates, no, Spanish bacon, marami, no, may cementite paint, ganun yung makikita mo yung value at yung mga products na nag-circulate sa Iloilo if you look at the documents of the arbitration, no. And ito yung iba dito actually, when I was reviewing the documents, yung iba kasi patay na nung na-file yung claim, no. And this guy, for example, si Pohang is Chinese, and si Puhumol is Indian, although they were British subjects, no. So ito yung claim noon. And in pushing for these claims, no, Great Britain argued that there was culpable neglect on the part of US authorities in the following respects, no. In the delay of a week by authorities at Washington in replying to the cable request of the commanding general at Manila for instructions as to the occupation of Iloilo on the withdrawal of the Spanish forces, in delaying the occupation of Iloilo after the arrival of US military forces in the harbor, so that the insurgents were able to make preparations for burning the town, in the manner of landing and occupation when finally made. So several years later, in 1925, no, dininay ng British American Tribunal yung claims ng mga British residents of Iloilo, no. Ang ground ng tribunal is that the United States held not liable for destruction of British property when Iloilo was burned by Filipino insurgents who were forcibly driven out by American forces on February 11, 1899. There was no duty upon the United States under the terms of the Protocol of Agreement with Spain concluded on August 12, 1898, or of the unratified Treaty of Peace, that's the Treaty of Paris, or otherwise, to assume control of Iloilo upon its evacuation by Spanish forces under pressure of Filipino insurgents. There was no sovereignty over the islands until the Treaty of Peace was ratified on April 11, 1899. Nor was any de facto control over Iloilo assumed until the taking of hostilities against the United States on the part of the so-called Filipino Republic required it on February 11, 1899. No culpable disregard of the interest of the claimants was shown in the conduct of military operations which were in charge of experienced officers. So, yun po, yung nangyari noon sa Iloilo. No? So, yes. And this is the last slide I'm trying to show. No? In 1975, they celebrated the 120th anniversary of the Port of Iloilo. No? And yung mga awardees, no? Yung mga awardees, yung nakapula, yung kasama ito sa claimants, no? They were still operating in Iloilo, no? In 1975, no? Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank, Hoskin and Company still here. Yung CARE, nandyan pa yung building ng CARE. It was restored. It's now occupied by the Tourism Office of Iloilo. Smith, Bell and Company. Strakan and McMurray, the building is still there. I visited the building just last Saturday. It's the first car assembly plant in the Philippines. No? And Warner Barnes, it's no longer here, but 1975, nandyan pa rin yung Warner. I think until the 80s, nandyan pa rin yung Warner Barnes. No? So, yun, yung kaunting ma-share ko sa inyo. Maraming salamat at magandang hapon sa inyong lahat. Hello?
Okay.
Yes, I have to, yeah.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Nereo Lujan, for providing us the rich history that surrounds these cases that we're studying, no? Even the details of the claims. We had planned to end our online book launch at 2 p.m. because our distinguished author has an important meeting in the next hour. But perhaps with the permission of our distinguished author and our speakers, I will open the floor to maybe one or possibly two questions, right?
Yes, of course,
so
thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Judge. As I mentioned, we have a descendant of the Philippine Revolutionary General and the first Iloilo provincial governor under the American period, General Martin Delgado. His name is Andy Moran. He's here with us. We also have students from the pioneer batch of the UP College of Law Extension Program in UP Visayas. So I'll request Rashar to please check if we have questions on Facebook.
All right, Sir Raj. Hi, Sir Raj. One of my classmates, Ayana Tan, she wants to ask Judge Raul Pangalangan how long it took him to finish his book.
Well, Raj, I will reply quickly.
Yes.
The materials I collected over 30 years of teaching public international law, exactly the way Professor Romel Cassis said, unless I did that, I would be forced to teach international law purely using the canons of the discipline from Western books and Western examples. So it was collected over roughly 3 decades. But sitting down to put them together, I think it helped that it was work from home under COVID, and I was able to spend time to put them together into a neat and collated volume. But thank you for the question.
Thank you, Judge. We also have a question regarding how to buy the book. They can't they can't wait to get their hands on the book. I understand it's available on the website of Brill. I'm not sure if
yes, in fact, Raj, I happily share the news that Brill, the publisher, actually offers a discount for those who attend the book launch. So I will share with Raj the code and the website.
Great. Thank you very much, Judge.
the website of Brill, which is the best way to do it.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. And if there are no additional questions, I guess we can conclude our online Iloilo book launch of this very important book on international law by Judge Raul Pangalangan. I wish to thank, of course, Chancellor Camposano for joining us, Dean Carlo Bistan, Professor Romel Casis, and also, of course, the resident historian of the province of Iloilo, Mr. Nereo Lujan, and of course, our distinguished author. On behalf of the organizers of this event, the University of the Philippines, Visayas, led by Chancellor Camposano, which is celebrating the 75th year of UP's presence in Iloilo, and of course, my home college, the University of the Philippines College of Law, led by Dean Bistan. I thank everyone for joining our online book launch of this very important book on international law by Judge Pangalangan. Have a good afternoon.